There's an old tale drifting through the dust of ancient Anatolia about a man who grew a perfect garden. And he spent years tending to it, cultivating vines that arched like cathedral ceilings, fruits that blushed under the morning sun, and lilies that breathed perfume into the wind. But one day, a neighbor, driven by envy, released goats into his land. They devoured everything. The man tried to reason, then pleaded, then threatened, but nothing changed. So finally, he abandoned his garden, traveled to the city, and became something else entirely. An advisor to kings, known not for beauty, but for cunning. This is the quiet tragedy of many thinkers. The garden of ideals crushed beneath the hooves of raw power. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this, though he wore no bitterness in his words, only cold observation. To him, the world was not a poem, but a game of masks. He wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Centuries later, across the Mediterranean, the Stoics wrote of virtue, wisdom, temperance, and the peace of inner strength. They believed in the fortress of the soul, indifferent to chaos, unmoved by flattery. They offered not dominance, but dignity. And yet, we live in a time that seems to echo both traditions. We are told to be strategic, but also to be kind, to be wise but never naive, to bend without breaking, to assert without ego, to love without losing power. So what do we do in a world that demands both the garden and the blade? In this essay, we'll walk a tightrope strung between two philosophical cliffs. On one side, the sharp pragmatism of Machiavelli, his unapologetic rules for influence. On the other, the deep, still waters of Stoic philosophy. What happens when we pair the cunning of the one with the discipline of the other? Can we outsmart others quietly, ethically, completely, without losing ourselves? Let's begin with the first of 6 Machiavellian principles and explore how the Stoics might shadow them, not to soften their edge, but to sharpen their aim. Rule 1. Control appearances. Master the mask. Machiavelli insisted that public image matters more than private virtue. If the world believes you are strong, honest, and just, then for all practical purposes, you are. And in many ways, this remains true. In politics, in business, even in friendship, perception sculpts reality. We are seen before we are heard, judged before we are understood. The Stoics wouldn't disagree. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one." But here's the twist. They cared less about appearing virtuous and more about being virtuous, regardless of whether it was seen. So how do we reconcile this? Perhaps by wearing the mask not as a lie, but as a symbol, not to deceive, but to direct. You don't wear confidence because you feel it. You wear it because it shapes you. You don't pretend to be wise to fool others. You perform wisdom until it becomes muscle memory. In this way, Machiavelli's manipulation becomes Stoic discipline. The outer self becomes a mirror for the inner one. You craft your reputation not for applause, but for alignment. Rule 2. Know the nature of others. Exploit predictability. Machiavelli observed that people are, by and large, predictable. Driven by fear, greed, ambition, and comfort, they can be read like maps and guided like streams. He advised rulers to study human nature not with reverence, but with a hunter's focus. This sounds cold, but is it wrong? The Stoics would say, "Know thyself first," but they too believed in understanding others deeply. Seneca advised his students to observe the temperaments of those around them, not to control them, but to better navigate chaos. To manipulate or to understand, that is the hinge. You can use someone's anger to provoke them, or to protect yourself from their violence.
You can use someone's desire to entice them or to free them from illusion. The same knowledge, two motives. So here, we arrive at the second paradox. The difference between manipulation and mastery often lies in the intention, not the technique. Machiavellian rule, when fused with Stoic awareness, becomes not domination, but elegant detachment. You predict people not to control them, but to remain unshaken by their storms. Rule 3. Use absence strategically. Become rare, become desired. Machiavelli understood that familiarity dulls power. A prince who is always available is a prince who loses mystique. He wrote that scarcity breeds value, and that absence can be a weapon sharper than presence. Today, in an age of overexposure and digital noise, this principle feels prophetic. We are constantly performing, constantly present. But presence, overused, becomes cheap. The Stoics might say, withdraw not for manipulation, but for renewal. Epictetus, once a slave-turned-philosopher, taught that we must retreat often into ourselves, not to isolate, but to observe. So how do we combine these ideas? Step back, not to become superior, but to become solid. Let others feel your absence not as punishment, but as an echo of your depth. In this way, you remain needed but not needy, wanted but not wanting. True influence often comes from what you withhold, not what you offer. Rule 4. Win through actions, not argument. Machiavelli believed in results, not rhetoric. He warned that debates often reveal weakness because they invite contradiction. It is better, he claimed, to act decisively and let your actions speak in silence. This echoes something Marcus Aurelius wrote. Don't waste time wondering what a good man is. Be one. But here too is danger. Action without principle is tyranny. Principle without action is impotence. The Stoic would say, before you act, ask, is this within my control? Is this aligned with reason? The Machiavellian would say, act before they can question, win, then explain. But what if we reverse the energy? What if we acted not out of fear of being challenged, but out of clarity of purpose? What if we embrace silence not to avoid being known, but to become unknowable? Words reveal strategy. Actions conceal it. There's something beautiful and terrifying about this. That your greatest power may lie in doing without explaining, in moving without broadcasting. As water wears away stone, so too does quiet consistency dismantle resistance. Rule 5. Cultivate useful enemies. Tension creates sharpness. Machiavelli suggested that enemies, paradoxically, are useful. They give us urgency. They give us focus. He wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved." This is perhaps his darkest principle, and one hardest to reconcile with Stoic peace. The Stoics taught tranquility, not tension. They urged detachment, not domination. But even here, a bridge can be built. The Stoics did not fear adversity. They invited it. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction." So what if an enemy is simply a mirror? A force that reveals your limits, tests your ethics, clarifies your path. To cultivate enemies doesn't mean to create chaos. It means to embrace pressure as a tutor, to stop seeking safety, to welcome contrast. The Stoic resists hatred, but he does not resist heat. So yes, let others oppose you, quietly, firmly, without rage. Let the resistance sculpt your calm. Let their noise strengthen your silence. Rule 6. Break morality when necessary, but never break yourself. Machiavelli's most controversial claim is this: morality is optional. Expediency matters more than virtue. To hold power, one must betray ideals when ideals betray survival. It's a brutal conclusion, and yet, how many have lived it? The Stoics offer a final counterpoint, not a rejection, but a reframing. To them, the only true power is over the self. You may lose your reputation, your comfort, your body, but if you guard your judgment, your intention, your will, then you remain undefeated. Where Machiavelli says, "Do what is necessary to win," the Stoic replies, "Do what is essential to remain yourself." And yet, life is rarely that clean. Sometimes you must deceive to protect the truth. Sometimes you must adapt to survive. The Stoic knows this too, but he distinguishes between strategy and surrender. The key is this: you can bend the rules of the world, but never let the world bend the rule of your soul. So, where does this leave us? In a strange, suspended place. Between the chessboard and the chapel. Between cunning and conscience. Perhaps Machiavelli was right about the world, but the Stoics were right about the self. Perhaps the way to outsmart everyone is not to defeat them, but to see them, to remain so composed, so deliberate, so inwardly sovereign, that no one owns your mind, even when they control the board. The garden, destroyed, still lives in the memory of the man who built it, and sometimes, from that grief, a sharper wisdom grows, a kind of dangerous serenity. And now, maybe, the question is not how to dominate the world, but how to remain yourself when dominance becomes possible. Or, more haunting still, if you could win everything by becoming someone else.
Would you still want to win?